Hi guys, my name is Allie Robertson, and this is my final lesson plan presentation. So I'm going to talk about the three ELs that I chose, and then I will jump into my SIOP that I made. So the first student I did was Charisse, and then I did Roberto, and then I did Erlinda. So starting with Charisse, she was advanced. She did really good when they asked her questions. Her responses were great. She was understandable. When she spoke, she used proper pronunciation, and her grammar and her responses were good. She made one mistake with her grammar, which will happen when I'm speaking with an EL. So that's just something that we can work on. What I noticed actually with all three ELs that most of their responses were pretty short, and I'm assuming it's because that they're nervous about being interviewed and speaking, which I mean I can understand. If I was being interviewed, I would be nervous as well. So back to Charisse, anyways. So when she was asked a question about what her favorite candy was, she was struggling to find some wording in some places. But once she was prompted, she explained in better detail than what she was doing. So if I were to give her some like activities to help her, I would encourage her to expand her vocabulary through independent and guided reading. I would also have her pull out vocabulary words that she is struggling with and then have her create a word map to help her. I would also give her sentence stems in case we come to a point where she is struggling to find out what she wants to talk about. And so this will like help her to remember. I would also allow for opportunities in the classroom to give her some oral speaking time, even if this is through a think, pair, share, or one-on-one time. I feel like those would really help her gain her confidence and become more comfortable in her ability to publicly speak in the classroom. So next was Roberto. He was very similar to Charisse. In a sense, he scored 1 point higher, but he was still advanced. Some strengths I noticed that he was very clear with what he was trying to say, so I was able to understand him. His responses were clear and accurate, and there weren't many times where he stumbled over his words, but when he did, I think it was because of how fast he was talking and his rate of speech, which would trip up him. That would happen to me too as well when I try to talk fast. Um, he had a couple of mess ups when he was talking with his vocabulary, but that's something that would happen as well. Other than that, there weren't many mistakes that I caught on to fully. I thought it was impressive how he was able to carry just a long conversation and tell stories. So it was nice to see him become more interactive than the other interviews that I watched with Charisse and Erlinda. But sometimes when he did like tell some of his stories, they weren't where we could understand them fully, just like the way that they were, just the manner he talked about them. But sometimes when people get excited when they're telling a story, that can happen. So overall, I said that he was a very proficient English speaker, and it would be nice to witness it in person. So some tips and tricks I would give to Roberto to help him would just be expanding his vocabulary. I would start to give him books that were higher than his level so he can start practicing using his higher vocabulary as he is very efficient as it is. I would also like to give him opportunities to give him more time to talk aloud in class as he is a very great conversationalist, and there could be many activities I could do to focus on that specifically. One way to help with this area of run-on sentences, when he goes to speak out loud, I would encourage him to first brainstorm and maybe write down certain points he wants to hit in case he gets to a point where he's struggling to talk about what he wants to next, that he could look down and it could refresh his memory on where he's at. So then the last student I did was Erlinda. So she was lower than the other two, but she still did great. She scored intermediate, so she was level 2. So I noticed that she was able to comprehend what was being said to her without the person giving her questions like repeated. So she responded with short and quiet responses, but I'm hoping that was just because she was nervous to be recorded. But there were a few times we heard glimpses of a longer sentence. And when she spoke, she had a decent use of pronunciation and grammar. When hearing her interview, though, through the computer, it was hard to tell in most cases her pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary, as many of her responses were cut short. But when it got to her presentation, she was clear she was able to speak longer, but had to take some pauses. So her sentence structure could have been better, but that's about it. But when they did ask her about her favorite Christmas movie, and she said she was unsure about what happened in it, but when she was asked questions and she was prompted, she was able to respond again and give better details of that. So if I were to give her some activities to help her, these I went in a little more depth with Erlinda as she was intermediate than I did with Charisse and Roberto, but this would apply to all three ELs. So I would also give her independent and guided reading time. I would want her to give her some sentence stem questions to go along with what she's reading to help her build her understanding of what she is reading. I would also like to start her an interactive vocabulary notebook where anytime she is reading a book, she would write the vocabulary words she's struggling with and then do a mind map of it. She could provide examples, non examples, definitions, the word used in a sentence, and then even draw a picture to help her remember. I would also work with her one on one about her speaking ability, where I would want her to talk out loud to me, hopefully, just to build the confidence so that she can succeed when being asked to talk out loud. So overall, every one of these three students I watched being interviewed did great. I can say that they may have seemed to get nervous every now and then, which I talked about earlier, but that happens when being recorded. But I also stated that I would love to witness them three in person and see if what I rated them would hold up in the classroom setting, which I think is fair, just because watching them on the computer is, way different in a classroom setting where they're more comfortable than being interviewed on the computer. Okay, so now moving on for my ELs, I'm gonna talk about my SIOP lesson. So I did a CPA model, and so a CPA model is concrete, pictorial, and abstract. So I'm gonna go through it and kind of as we're going, keep that in mind of what I said, but it may not make as much sense until we get to the last part, which is the description of the lesson. So just starting from the beginning. So my grade and subject is sixth grade math. What unit we're doing is learning how to add and subtract integers. So my TEK is number and operations. The student applies mathematical process standards to represent addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division while solving and justifying solutions. So the student is expected to add, subtract, multiply, and divide integers fluently. So with that being said, because this TEK is wanting to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, obviously we can't learn how to do all four of those in one day. So I broke this TEK up to where it would probably take over 2 days, but the first day would start with adding and subtracting. So my content objective was upon request, the sixth grade student will add and subtract integers fluently with 70% accuracy. So that will come more into details as we keep going. So my language objective the student will be able to identify key characteristics when adding and subtracting integers. Some key vocabulary that I took out of this lesson was integers, adding, subtracting, sum, positive numbers, negative numbers, and rational numbers. So when they're in fifth grade, they learn how to add positive rational numbers when they're in the fifth grade. And so integers fall under rational numbers. Rational numbers is just like the big umbrella, but now we're focusing more on integers as a whole instead of falling under rational numbers. So I included that in there so I could build off their prior knowledge of what they learned in the fifth grade so we can continue to use it in the sixth grade. So materials that they would need are papers, pencils, red and yellow math circles, handouts, and their interactive math journal. So my higher order thinking questions that I would give to them to prompt them with this lesson is how can you use addition and subtracting of integers to solve real world problems? When adding two numbers with the same sign, what sign do you use for the sum? And then the last one be choose any two negative integers. Is the sum of the integer less than or greater than the value of either of the integers? I mean, I know that one can be a little tough, but I want to see where they can take it. And that one might be just where we may do it as a class, have just an open discussion about it as, I want them all to be more comfortable orally speaking. So this would give them a chance to maybe do a think, pair, share on that question, as I did at a harder one in there than normal. So my building background, so linking it to experience, I would simply ask them if they've ever gone shopping with their mom and wanted to buy a toy. So, say the student was only given $5, but the toy cost $10. I would ask my students, "Would you be able to buy that toy?" I would relate this lesson maybe to money sense and linking to their prior knowledge, because at this age, typically students are starting to learn more about money as we enter into the sixth grade. So most times students don't know that they're adding and subtracting integers when they're doing normal activities outside of school. So that's a good one just to help them kind of link experience to what we're about to learn. So my next one is links to learning. So when the students were in fifth grade, kind of how I said earlier, they learned about adding and subtracting positive rational numbers fluently. So rational numbers include all the integers as well. So with this being said, in sixth grade, students go more in depth when they start to add and subtract positive and negative integers. So once students have shown a mastery in adding and subtracting integers, that is when we will move on to multiplying and dividing integers, as I kind of hit on earlier. So the background knowledge from adding rational numbers should help students link to their new knowledge that they're learning as well. So again, the key vocabulary that I took out were integers, adding, subtracting, rational sum, positive and negative numbers. So I chose these vocabulary words to go with the lesson to help them remember their prior knowledge they learned in the previous grades. So these help my students continue to build on their foundation of math. I also chose to pull out rational when doing this lesson so they could see that as a teacher, I am breaking down rational numbers from a bigger category into integers. So, how I'm going to incorporate these vocabulary words into the lesson is that my students will be writing the definitions into their interactive notebooks once we as a class discover a class definition. So, some of the definitions I may have had may have been lengthy or wordy or maybe just too complex. I added those in there for the sake of me, reading it and anybody else who reads it. So I would obviously break that down into their level and have them try to figure it out. So it's easier for them to remember if it's one that they were able to help create. So once they did that, we will then draw a picture and a math problem to show we understand the vocabulary word, just something symbolic so that they can understand it more. And it's a great resource for students to use when they become stuck in their learning of adding and subtracting integers. So my student activities for scaffolding, I did modeling, guided and independent. Grouping, I chose small group. Processes, I did writing, listening, and speaking. And strategies, I did hands-on, meaningful, and links to objective. My review and assessment was individual and written, and so it'll all make sense as we get to the bottom, I promise. So for reviewing key vocabulary, this is where I'm going to start talking about my CPA model more in depth. So the model of the lesson that I'm doing, like I said, is CPA, which is concrete, pictorial, and then the abstract stage. So this is a great model to use for math, and especially when being used for English language learners, as the concrete stage is where students will be given hands-on materials. Then pictorial is where they are given the math problem in picture form. And then the abstract stage is where they will see regular math problems. With this being said, I've added in many places where they'll be identifying if it is a positive or negative, what the operation is, and what the sum is. So this will hit on the vocabulary words that I have pulled out for the students to write in their interactive notebooks. So with it being math, there is a lot of vocabulary. So there will be vocabulary used throughout this whole entire unit of integers. So to review some key content concepts, the students will be completing a check for understanding at the end. So this would be the final stage of the CPA model, which would be the abstract portion. So this lesson model will make more sense in the description, like I have been stating throughout. So the check for understanding will be of adding and subtracting integers. So once students have shown a mastery of this content, it will be more of a smooth transition into multiplying and dividing integers. So this check for understanding will allow me to fix any confusion any students may have before moving on. So the abstract model for this lesson will take place as the post-assessment, which will be considered reviewing the key concepts. So my description of my lesson, this is where hopefully everything that I've said before will kind of make sense. And when thinking about the ELs I chose, this would be really great with stuff that I have noticed that they've struggled with. So I'm gonna restate it again, as I've restated a lot of times, and this would also be a good model for any of y'all to use in any of your contents because it's a really great model to use for your lesson. So concrete, pictorial, and abstract. So it's great for all subjects, but especially math, since math is a very complex subject. So the pre-assessment is where I personally would do my concrete. And so this is where students will be hands-on. So this is where the hands-on part of my lesson comes in. It's right here. So the students will be completing the concrete part of the lesson. So students will be given 10 to 15 minutes to explore adding and subtracting integers with our yellow and red circle counters. So they're just like little circles that they can either be a set of all red or yellow, or it can have red on one side, yellow on the other. And sometimes they're foamy. So the students will be informed at the beginning that the red means negative and yellow means positive. They will have 5 minutes of modeling to discover what they can about their red and yellow circle counters that they were given. And so they can sit there and model them. They can see how many reds they have and how many yellows they have, and maybe kind of see what kind of problems they can come up with on their own. It just depends on how your students take it for the first 5 minutes, but I'm wanting them to explore. And as we're exploring, I would want them to write in their interactive notebook about their findings, just so they can get used to using their counters. So once the 5 minutes are up, for the rest of the 10 minutes, I would give them certain math problems to follow and model with their counters to see what they can come up with. So right here, I have provided some questions. These aren't specifically ones that I would use, but they're just an example, or you could use them either or. So this is the concrete stage. So concrete is just them hands-on learning it. You as a teacher aren't really guiding, it's more of inquiry, so they're kind of doing it themselves just to see what they can come up with. So then when we move to the formative assessment is where the pictorial stage will come in. So they will be given a sheet with different integer problems that are modeled by pictures. So that may just be, maybe flowers or cookies or anything that can be modeled pictorially. So they will use what they learned from the concrete stage and apply it to their new pictorial method. So students will be identifying if it is positive or negative numbers and what the operation is, and they'll be asked to solve for the answer. Students will be doing this in their interactive notebooks. So they're just writing all the characteristics that they're seeing and, using still that key vocabulary that we have pulled out at the beginning. So using that pictorial method right after the concrete method will help the students gain their foundation in adding and subtracting integers. And so this will help the students as well for the summative assessment. So when I look at my ELs, I feel like all two of the stages of the model that we learned would help them a lot. Because they are seeing it pictorially, they have done it hands-on, they are incorporating their vocabulary that sometimes they have struggled on. So I feel like this model could really help them in the classroom. So then the summative assessment is what I saved for the abstract symbolic stage, which is just actually doing problems without hands-on or pictorial help. So this is where you as a teacher can step in before they do that and, maybe model yourself to the students a couple of problems, maybe one or two, just to make sure that they're all on the same page. And then this is where I would do my check for understanding, and I would give them 5 to 6 different problems of adding and subtracting integers. On their check for understanding, they will be asked to identify if the integers are positive or negative and what this mathematical symbol is, and they will ask to model their work. So students will use what they learned from the concrete and pictorial stage to solve these problems. And if we get to the final stage and they do their check for understanding, and I see that some of them are still struggling, this would be a good time to reiterate for them to go back to their first 2 stages, the concrete and then their pictorial stage and have them continue to practice on it because those first two stages is the foundation before they get to the abstract. And so that part will really help them um, really learn adding and subtracting integers. So this is my SIOP that I did for them, and I think would be good for any subject, any grade level. Hands-on is a very great way of learning. So it's pictorial, and then they get to the abstract stage and they can learn what they use to succeed in the last stage. So that's my SIOP, and that is what I did for my ELs. So thank you. And if there's any feedback that anyone would give, maybe to make my lesson plan better or anything else, that would be great. Thank you.